Hi, and welcome to the Global Education Group CME video blog, where we address emerging hot topics on the CME enterprise and share them with you. Today we're going to be talking about bias in CME. This is a topic that many in the CME enterprise felt was dealt with several years ago. However, an August 19th editorial in the Journal of the American Medical Association by Arthur Bernard Lowe argues that a problem with bias in CME presentations exists and needs to be further addressed. He attempts to link this alleged bias to grant-funded CME, that is CME that has been funded via an educational grant from predominantly pharmaceutical companies. In order to determine if this is good journalism or just finger-pointing, let's look at three critical points Lowe attempts to make in this JAMA article. First, Lowe states that CME professionals spend more time focusing on conflict of interest disclosure and resolution than on bias in presentations. Two responses here. First, he cites no research nor provides any footnote to support this claim. And secondly, he virtually ignores two massive studies that were done over the last several years regarding bias in CME. Now, one of these studies was done at a university, the other at a large online aggregator of education. And these are studies of literally tens of thousands of CME activities and more than 1 million participants at those CME activities. Both studies independently concluded that less than 1% of the CME programs actually have bias in them. And in fact, one of those studies looked at bias not only for those activities that were not grant funded, they weren't supported by educational grants, but as well as those that were funded by educational grants. And strangely enough, even though there was still less than 1% bias, it's the activities that had no commercial support or no grant funding attached to them that actually showed a little bit higher bias. Lowe's response to the facts in this case is simply this. He says that even if the physician learners in a CME activity don't report bias, these learners simply aren't smart enough or don't have the knowledge to detect bias. Well, Lowe's second point is a hypothetical that just doesn't exist in practice. He writes, and I quote, "If drug companies were permitted to suggest or choose speakers, they would likely select physicians who favor their products. While this may be true, this practice is specifically banned by the ACCME standards for commercial support and guidelines." Last, Lowe does provide some evidence for making a claim about conflicts of interest. Lowe claims that after disclosing conflicts of interest, advisors, a group of people, and again it's worthwhile to remember that term, advisors, that after disclosing conflicts of interest, advisors in a study showed that they actually may give more biased advice. The problem is with his reference. Lowe references a study in the American Economic Review featuring these advisors who estimate the value of coins inside of a jar. Applicability to CME? I'm not finding it here. The article's title in the JAMA piece was, "What is the enemy in CME? Conflict of interest or bias?" Well, based on the current facts, it seems that Lowe maybe made up an enemy that simply doesn't exist. The only way to analyze an argument that lacks so much merit such as this is to ask, should we blame Bernard Lowe for trying to make the argument, or should we blame JAMA for publishing it? As always, if you have any questions about the CME enterprise or attacks on the CME enterprise, feel free to contact us here at globaleducationgroup.com.